used them as makeshift shields. Libidine's spears and Todd's fireballs lit up the remnants of the dresser, but Franklin was unscathed. "Libby," I ordered, "get that woman out of here and see what she knows. Then make her forget all of it."
"Got it,"
the curvy succubus called out. Then she backflipped into the air and then flew toward the frozen woman. Cupid released her spell on the naked blonde, and then Libidine picked her up in her arms and darted out of the room. While that was happening, I didn't waste a second to toss a ray of jade fire around Marvin Franklin. As the flames surrounded him, I moved my enchanted hand to the side and sent him hurtling toward the flaming bed. Franklin tossed up a violet shield of his own to stop his trajectory, and I heard a wet pop as he collided with his barrier. He shot a blast of red hellfire down into the ground and rocketed himself upward, out of the trajectory of my jade trap. Before he could come down on the ground, a fireball from Cupid struck him in the shoulder and sent him spinning backward. Franklin crashed into the bookcase on the wall behind him and completely decimated the piece of furniture. The naked man pulled himself out of the rubble, and he was now looking much worse for wear. Franklin now wore a third-degree burn on his left shoulder that appeared to still be bubbling with red-hot gore. He gritted his teeth, clapped his hands together, and summoned yellow hellfire into his palms as he pulled them apart. I was prepared for a handful of enchanted spears, but Franklin's hatred spell manifested itself very differently than Libby's. The yellow fire engulfed his body and lifted him up into the air. Sia and Cupid tried to halt his ascent with a blast of black and blue flames, but the attacks did little but bounce off. Franklin laughed maniacally, raised his arm above his head, and placed his open palm on the ceiling of the room. The yellow fire spread across the colonial interior as quick as lightning and headed downward.
"Off the ground!"
Cupid demanded as she scooped up Sia in her arms and lifted off into the air, while I hopped up and summoned a platform of purple hellfire beneath my feet. Not a second later, the rush of yellow flames met up on the floor, and massive yellow spikes shot out from the walls, ceiling, and ground. If any one of us had been standing there or even near a wall, they would have been skewered. But thankfully none of us had. And then I remembered Todd. That's when the imp let out a high-pitched scream, and my heart hit my stomach at the thought of my best friend being skewered by this fucker. I looked down and saw that the imp was perfectly fine, since his body was pinned harmlessly in a space between a few of the spikes. "Worst game of Twister ever," the imp grumbled. "Here, Jakey." Todd fumbled around in his pocket and then produced a familiar black cube. It was one of the portable demon traps Raphael had given us, so I summoned it into my free hand with an emerald flame, and then I quickly shifted my flames to red. Before I could use the Key of Solomon, Franklin clapped his hands together like a crocodile, and the walls of the massive spike trap mimicked his actions. As the entire room of death slammed down on us all, I was forced to drop the demon trap so I could call forth 4 small purple walls around my friends and me. Even so, the impact of Franklin's attack drove me to my knees and nearly knocked me off my ledge. I grunted as I held my ground and pushed back with my power. I was the only thing keeping my friends from being turned into human pincushions, and there was nothing in the world that was going to get me to release my spell. "You're much more annoying than Ira warned," Franklin hissed, "but you'll break eventually. I've got all damn day, Marcus."
"Jacob!"
Sia exclaimed.
"Your divine powers are taking over!"
I could feel the holy energy surging through my body as my horns sprouted from my temples. I let out a primal scream, stood back to my feet, and forcefully pushed the massive spikes away from my friends. "Well, I don't have all fucking day, Marvin," I growled as I released the purple spell above me and blasted the fucker with a brilliant white light. The spikes on the floor and ceiling disappeared as Franklin refocused his energy into a protective violet barrier of his own. The white light struck the shield, but instead of ricocheting off, it drove the fucker up into the ceiling. The politician let out a wail of pain as his burnt shoulder struck the roof. I halted my attack, and Franklin fell from 10 or more feet onto the ground. "Hold still!" Todd giggled as he snatched up the demon trap I'd dropped on the floor. "This'll only hurt for a minute." The Key of Solomon projected out onto the fucker's collapsed body, ensnaring him in its spell. Or so we thought.
Why isn't it working?
Cupiditas gasped.
Fornius couldn't possibly be that strong.
Sia added. I had no idea why our trusty demon trap didn't work, but I sure as fuck was going to find out. Franklin giggled as he weakly pulled himself to his feet. His nose was bloody and broken, and the gash on his shoulder was now so gnarly that you could see all the way to his bones. Ira's plan worked perfectly, he cackled as he nursed his useless left arm. Start talking, I demanded, or we're going to make your death a whole lot more painful. The politician's hand lit up as he produced a small yellow dagger. Without another word, he plunged it upward toward his skull. "Wait!" I implored, but was cut off by a blast of blue hellfire. Cupid's spell struck Marvin Franklin's hand a millisecond before he delivered the fatal blow and froze him in time. Sia followed her sister's lead and quickly ensnared the fucker with her black hellfire. Franklin's body was lifted into the air as he struggled to breathe. He tried to cast some sort of defensive spell, but Sia's magic reduced his spell to little more than a few brightly colored sparks.
You heard, Jacob,
the madam hissed, and then lowered the flames so that Franklin's head was free.
Start talking.
Marvin Franklin simply laughed. You should have seen the look on your fucking faces, he taunted. You all thought that demon trap was gonna work. Why didn't it? I demanded. Is that your black hellfire power? Immunity to demon traps? The fucker started to cackle even louder at my words. You still don't get it, do you? He grinned. I'm not a demon.
Nice try, Fornius.
Cupid spat.
We know who you really are. Only somebody as fucking sinister as you could come up with such a convoluted scheme to gain access to the Porta ad Inferos.
Don't talk about your sister that way, succubus, Franklin chuckled. It was her idea.
You're the demon of rhetoric and manipulation.
Sia tightened her spell, and there was an audible pop from somewhere inside the politician's torso.
Do you really think we're going to fall for your tricks?
Plus you're a politician, Todd added. I don't trust you as far as I can throw you. Believe what you want, Franklin shook his head. But I'm not Fornius. I'm just a plain old mortal who got wrapped up in the demonic world. A mortal? I sneered. You seem pretty powerful in the dark arts for a fucking mortal. That's what happens when you've been a loyal follower of Azazel for centuries, poser! He laughed. Unlike the rest of my brethren, I didn't fall for you and the traitorous succubi's charm. Once the Father of Warfare is returned, he will join with his brethren and bring the army of the divine to its knees. That's where you're wrong, kiddo, Todd scoffed. We already know where the Porta ad Inferos is. After we splatter you all over this beautiful interior and tarnish your legacy, we're gonna go there and stop Sister Ira. Tarnish my legacy? Franklin cackled. We're gonna make you more disgraced than OJ, bro, Todd warned. Political legacy ruined, publicly disgraced, all that fun stuff. Do you honestly think I give a fuck about the mortal name of a long-dead demon? Franklin shook his head.
So Fornius is dead,
Sia confirmed. Fornius was weak, the politician explained. My master and his brethren killed him a long time ago. Sister Ira suggested I take on his alias just to fuck with you. It looks like it worked.
That does sound like Ira,
Cupid noted with a shrug. My legacy will live on eternally as the man who finally gained the demonic access to the Porta ad Inferos, the mortal who brought about the end of the divine rule! Franklin's voice now grew shrill and insane. Too bad you won't be around to see it. Huh, I growled. Without another word, I used my green hellfire powers to pick up 2 broken pieces of the oaken dresser. I raised them up on each side of Franklin's head, tossed up a purple barrier behind the fucker, and then I slammed the debris together. Fragments of skull bone and gore sprayed across the violet shield with the first blow, but Franklin simply laughed in agony. The second time, the fucker's jaw was dislocated, and his tongue flapped helplessly out of his mouth as he continued with the gurgled howling. Finally, the third blow reduced his head to a bloody pulp, and the cocky fucker was silenced. Sia released her spell, and Franklin's dead body fell to the ground. "We need to go find Libby and the Archangels," I commanded. "If Sister Ira has played us this far, then chances are she's still one step ahead of us. We need to change that."
What are you suggesting, Jacob?
Sia questioned. "We need to do the last thing she'd expect," I said as I made my way out of the room. "We need to head straight to the source, the Portus ad Inferos." Chapter 15. "This is a foolish idea, Jacob," Raphael warned as I walked around the hotel room gathering up our stuff. "Seeking out the Porta ad Inferos will lead you to nothing but pain and suffering." "We have to get ahead of Ira," I retorted angrily. "She's going to find out about her little boy toy's death soon, and then she's going to come looking for us. I've already told Jane and Oliver to head out this way and meet us by the property." "All right," the Archangel continued. "Say you get there before her. Then what? The pit cannot be closed. Will you just wait for her with your army of cultists at your side?" "Maybe." I shrugged and tossed some of my clothes into my duffel bag. "If that's what it takes to stop Azazel from being reborn, then I'm ready to go to war." "There hasn't been a legitimate battle between the forces of good and evil in centuries," Raphael pleaded. "Even our little scuffle with Azazel and his minions was just that, a scuffle. I can assure you that Ira will not be coming to the Porta ad Inferos alone." I dropped the duffel bag onto the floor in a fit of anger and turned to the Archangel. "Then what are you suggesting?" I demanded. "That we do nothing while that asshole Azazel is revived an hour away from here?" "Maybe." Uriel now spoke. "The forces of the Divine have defeated Azazel in battle before. His army of followers has thinned, and his ego is certainly rattled from being bested by a mortal 2 times in a row."
That's what scares me.
Sia nodded grimly.
I know how Azazel's mind works. He was willing to break the Accords simply to pump up his own ego. Who knows what he will do once he is back on Earth in the flesh? He won't stop until we're all dead.
Cupid added.
And then, pumped up from his victory, he'll march right to Heaven's gates, with Lucifer's army in tow.
"If he even can be resurrected," Raphael objected. "Sister Ira lied to you about Fornius. How do you know she isn't lying to you about her master plan?" "Doubtful," I countered. "She's gone through an awful lot of trouble to get to this point, and to get this land freed up. Ira might be crazy, but I doubt she'd go this far for a cruel joke." "Not a joke, Jacob," the dark-haired Archangel continued. "I fear she might be setting a trap for you." "How so?" I asked curiously. Raphael put his hand on my shoulder and then knelt down slightly to look me in the eye. "The Porta ad Inferos only goes one way, Jacob. What if Sister Ira isn't trying to resurrect Azazel, but rather send you to hell, where her master can kill you himself? Even if you survived, there would be no way back." The Archangel had a point. That did sound like the sort of sadistic ploy a BDSM succubus would come up with. But then why all the pomp and circumstance? Why would Ira have jumped through a million hoops just to kill us? Something didn't add up. "I appreciate your concern, Raphael," I told the dark-haired man. "I really do. But I still think we should go check it out. If you think it's a bad idea, then you don't have to come along. We can handle Ira and whatever she throws at us on her own." "Yeah," Todd scoffed. "We didn't need your help last time, and we were just fine. Jakey and I here took out 1,000 cultists all by our lonesome." The imp's words were a gross exaggeration, of course, but both Uriel and Raphael stood there for a moment and pondered. "We would never abandon you, Jacob," Raphael finally spoke. "If you wish to fight Sister Ira head-on, then we will fight by your side." "I like you, mortal," Uriel added. "You've got gusto, and fear no one. In fact—"
"He didn't say no homo, bro,"
Todd whispered loudly in my ear. "In fact," Uriel continued, visibly rattled by the imp's words, "I'd even go so far as to say Raphael and I would be willing to round up more of our brethren to aid your cause." The Archangel's offer made my attitude do a 180. I stood up, smiled at the two angels, and then clapped my hands together happily. "That's what I like to hear!" I grinned. "How long do you guys need to gather up more angels?" "The location of the Porta ad Inferos is only an hour or so away from here with your Earth vehicles, right?" Uriel asked hopefully. "Of course," I nodded. "My guess is that we can be there sometime around early morning." "That's all the time we will need," Raphael said, and then turned to Uriel. "Come, brother, let us go and gather as many of our forces as we can. Tonight, the next chapter in the war begins." Raphael walked over to Uriel, and then the two closed their eyes and vanished with a flash of brilliant light.
"Bro!"
Todd rubbed his eyes in agony.
"If we're gonna continue our relationship with these angels, we really need to invest in some sunglasses or something. It feels like my eyes had their assholes stretched open with red-hot pokers."
I shook my head and chuckled. "Where did you come up with these analogies?"
"My brilliant imp mind."
Todd tapped his temple slyly.
"That and a fuck ton of weed."
Out of the corner of my eye, I could see all three of the succubi huddled together, whispering and giggling to each other. When they noticed me looking, Cupiditas pretended to yawn.
"Oh, we have a long day ahead of us,"
she said with mock weariness.
"If we want to get there as early as we're planning, we're going to need to hit the sack here pretty soon."
"I get it."
Todd winked at the blonde.
"You want to go play tonsil hockey or hide the salami or, you know what? I'm too fucking tired to think up another clever analogy. I'm gonna go hit the sack for real while you hit up Jacob's."
The imp sauntered off toward his bedroom suite, dragging his feet and rubbing his eyes the entire way until he was out of view. I turned back to the succubi and gave them a coy smile. "Is that really the reason you wanted to get me alone?" Libidine tilted her head downward and then looked up at me with her violet doe eyes.
"We just figured that it would be nice if we could grow our connection a little bit more,"
she said innocently.
"We do have a large battle in the morning. Not to mention it'll help us sleep better."
Cupid added with a giggle.
"I thought it'd be fun."
Sia cooed. "All right." I held up my hands in defeat sarcastically. "You've twisted my arm. Shall we head to the bedroom?" Cupid walked over and placed her hand on my chest.
"I was thinking more about that large shower,"
she purred. "You don't have to tell me twice," I said, as I wrapped my arms around the fit blonde and then stuck out my hands for the other two. "Darlings?" Sia and Libby took my hand and instantly began to pull me toward the bedroom suite. We made our way into the bathroom, and the succubi didn't waste another single second before they got undressed. Sia tugged off her shirt in a single pull, exposing her petite breasts and small red nipples. The redhead twirled her hair playfully as she removed her shorts and tossed them seductively onto the bench on the other side of the bathroom. I tried to admire the delicate, fiery flower between Sia's legs, but my vision was quickly obscured by the fabric of my own shirt as it was pulled over my head.
"We've had such a long day,"
Sia cooed.
"We're all hot and sweaty and dirty, so I'm going to prepare the shower. In the meantime, you girls get him going." "Right away, Sister Superbia."
Libidine giggled, and then I felt her hands pull at my waistband. The next thing I knew, I was fully naked, and the two succubi were down on their knees in front of me.
"You know, I've seen this thing many times, but I'm still always taken aback by how huge it is."
Cupid mused as she wrapped her hand around the base of my erection and began to stroke.
I'll let you do the honors, Libby. You need the practice.
Libidine didn't hesitate or make a witty remark. Instead, she moved her head forward and wrapped her warm lips around the tip of my cock. Her violet eyes looked up and locked with my own as she slowly made her way down the shaft of my rock-hard dick.
I know you can do it.
Cupid playfully taunted the curvy succubus.
Just keep pushing.
As she talked, the fit blonde pulled her shirt over her head, and my eyes began to wander up and down her torso. Cupid's body was that of a goddess. Her stomach was tight and chiseled, and her arms were toned. Then there were her breasts, which also looked like they were perfectly crafted by a master sculptor. They were abnormally perky with thick nipples that stuck out like the eraser of a pencil. A wave of pleasure shot through my body and quickly put my focus back on Libidine. The succubus had now gone almost all the way down, but she was struggling to get the last few inches into her mouth. I could feel the back of her throat spasming against the head of my penis, and I probably would have filled her full of my cum right there and then if I had less self-control. Libby must have sensed my satisfaction, because she suddenly got a second wind. Her lips slid up the remaining part of my shaft, and the corners of her lips curled upward into a half-smile.
Good.
Cupid purred and rubbed the back of her friend's head.
Want me to take over?
Libby's eyes narrowed and darted over to the blonde. Then the curvy woman's hand reached up and began to gently rub my balls as she continued to move delicately back and forth. The succubus wasn't going to give up her prize.
Fine. Be that way.
Cupid shrugged and then stood up.
I'll go have some fun with Superbia. See you in a bit.
As the fit blonde walked toward the shower, I couldn't help but admire her bouncing ass. She looked back, blew me a kiss, and then walked into the glass shower. The entire encasement was already covered with steam, and my imagination ran wild as I thought about what they could have been doing in there. But my thoughts were cut off as Libby let my erection pop out from the grasp of her voluptuous lips. I let out another groan of pleasure in response.
Superbia asked me to get you ready.
The succubus cooed and pulled at her shirt.
I fully intend to do so. You'll be ready for round 2, right?
With you three? I chuckled. Always. Libidine's massive breasts fell away from the fabric of her shirt and bounced vivaciously on her chest.
Okay, let's play a game.
The dark-haired woman mused.
Let's see if I can get you off without using my best asset.
Your personality? I joked.
Very funny.
Libby giggled and then slowly raised up so that her breasts were inches away from my erection.
Good thing I already got it all nice and wet, right?
I knew what was coming, but even then, I wasn't prepared at all for what happened next. Libby smooshed her giant breasts around my cock and began to move her entire torso up and down. As it passed by the top of her rack, the succubus would lap her long tongue against the tip. It was far from the first time she'd done this, but for some reason, this time it felt like total euphoria. I held back for as long as I could, but the sight of Libidine's beautiful face staring up at me seductively as she pleasured me nearly sent me over the edge. The succubus finally stopped, wrapped her hand around the base of my dick, and slid it back into her mouth. I couldn't take it anymore. My hand slid onto the back of Libidine's head, and I unloaded what felt like a gallon into her mouth. The succubus took it all in stride, pulled her head back, and then licked her lips as a satisfied look spread across her face.
Yummy,
she said with a wink, and then stood to her feet.
I hope you really are ready to go again, because it sounds like my sisters may have already gotten started without us.
From behind the steam-covered glass, I could hear a few muffled moans. What are we waiting for, then? I asked, and started for the shower. Let's jump right into the action. As I pulled open the door of the shower, I was greeted with one of the most incredible sights anyone could ask for. Cupid had Sia pressed against the tile wall, locked in a passionate kiss. One of the fit blonde's hands gently caressed the redhead's face, while the other held a pulsating shower head between Sia's legs. Sia's legs looked like they were about to give out from weakness, so I quickly ran over and grabbed her from behind.
Just in time.
The redhead moaned as Cupid pulled away.
It's almost a shame.
Cupid giggled.
I was really enjoying that, but now the real fun can begin.
Libidine's hands wrapped around the front of Cupiditas's soaking wet body and began to rub her seductively.
Jacob and I already had some fun while you two were in here.
She purred into the blonde's ear.
But it looks like he's already good to go again.
Sia nodded in agreement as she bent over and slid herself back onto my cock. We both let out a groan as I entered her pussy, and then I slowly began pumping in and out of her while the other two succubi watched.
Don't think we're gonna sit back and do nothing.
Cupid brandished the showerhead playfully. As I was gliding in and out of the redhead's wet pussy, the blonde succubus walked over and slid the massager back down between Sia's legs. Sia's moans grew louder instantly. Libby followed Cupid over, turned to face her friend's torso, and then slowly began to tease her nipples one at a time with her mouth. The madam's groans of pleasure were getting more intense by the second. A minute or two later, she threw out her arm to brace herself against the wall and repeatedly orgasmed on my cock.
Next.
She giggled as she slid off and stumbled forward.
My turn.
Cupid shot Libby a look as she strutted past.
You two have already had your fun.
For whatever reason, the way the fit blonde spoke her words got me all hot and bothered. Before she could do anything, I swept her up in my arms, one hand on the small of her back and the other between her shoulders. I picked up Cupid and slid her slender body down onto my erection. She responded by wrapping her legs around my waist and pressing her lips passionately against mine. The two of us continued to make out as Cupid ground her hips up and down on my cock. My eyes were closed, but I could picture the succubus's entire body in my mind vividly. Every curve, every tone, and every smooth feature. Then I heard Libidine let out a gasp, and I forced one of my eyes open. Sia was down on her knees in front of the dark-haired woman. Her face was pressed tightly against Libidine's slit, and it appeared that her jaw was getting quite the workout. Libby's eyes were nearly rolling back in her head as she ran her hands lovingly through Sia's wet hair. Meanwhile, Cupid's perfect breasts were bouncing happily with each thrust against my pelvis, and the blonde was now staring into my eyes deeply as she bit her lip.
I think I'm almost there,
she said through gasps. I increased the pace of my thrusts, and Cupid bit her lip more intensely. As her moans grew louder, it drove me closer and closer to the edge. The fit blonde suddenly tensed up and wrapped her arms around my torso. Her entire body quivered as she let out a moan so loud that it could have shattered the glass around us. At the same time, I heard Libidine let out an orgasmic wail. That was it. I felt myself pass over the brink, and Cupid's pussy continued to shudder as I filled it up with my sperm. Both of us were breathing heavily as I sat the blonde back onto the wet tile floor. Whew, I panted. Thank goodness we're already in the shower, huh? The four of us did a quick pass over on our bodies with soap and water, and then we exited the shower with haste. We helped each other dry off, and then we headed to bed. What a fucking day, I sighed as I slid under the sheets of the king-sized bed.
No pun intended.
Cupid giggled and rolled over so that she was next to me, under the covers. Sia snuggled up on my other side, and Libidine plunked down next to her.
Tomorrow is going to be much, much worse,
the redhead admitted.
I can almost assure you of that.
That's why it's so important to enjoy the here and now, I mused. Tomorrow is a big day. Hopefully, 24 hours from now, we'll be on the road back home. Maybe even with another member of our party.
That sounds wonderful,
Libby said groggily. I reached out with my telekinetic flames and flipped off the light switch on the other side of the room. As our bedroom suite went dark, I thought about what was going to happen next. If Raphael was right, then the war between heaven and hell was about to get a whole lot more real. Chapter 16. My eyes shot open when I heard the sound of the blaring alarm across the room. This had been the best sleep I had gotten in weeks, and I was halfway tempted to smash the damn alarm with my telekinesis, or burn it to a crisp with my hellfire, or just toss it out the window. I looked up and saw a large red 2 a.m. staring me back in the face. As much as I didn't want to get up, we needed to make it to the Porta ad Inferos before the current residents were awake and could see us snooping around. I closed my eyes and fought against my urge to fall back asleep. Instead, I thought about how much I didn't want to wake up. That was disgusting enough to conjure up a small blast of emerald fire and press off the snooze button without even sitting up in bed. The succubi's soft, warm skin was still pressed up tightly against my chest, but they began to stir. I doubt anyone could have slept through the shrill ear torture that had been blasting in our ears.
I don't want to wake up.
Libby yawned.
I'd love it if we could just stay in bed all day.
Cupidita sat up, and I had to stifle a laugh. The blonde succubus was suffering from a major case of bedhead, and her short hair shot off in every direction, like a beautiful bird's nest. She smacked her lips together, rubbed her eyes, and then groaned.
Is it really time to wake up already?
She moaned, and then slammed her head back down onto the pillow. Sia was already out of bed and heading toward the bathroom. The redhead re-emerged a few moments later, fully dressed and with all our clothes in hand.
Good morning, sunshines.
The madam grinned and tossed our clothes on the bed.
What the hell is so good about it?
Cupid asked as she forced herself off the king-sized mattress.
It's 2 in the morning. Early to bed, early to rise.
Sia began.
If you say one more word, I'm going to throw you through the wall, sister.
Cupid growled through her messy hair. Yikes, I whispered to Libby. I knew Cupid was the grumpier one of the group, but I've never seen her this way.
Cupiditas despises mornings.
The dark-haired succubus stifled a giggle.
And today is a very early morning.
Would some coffee and donuts make things better? I offered the blonde. There's a place down the road that's open 24 hours.
Any sort of food would be incredible.
Cupid acknowledged as she tugged her skin-tight shorts up over her ass.
Please, get her sustenance as soon as possible.
Sia joked.
I'm starting to fear for my life.
The succubi and I finished getting dressed and then headed out to the main area of the suite.
I wonder if Todd is awake.
Libidine asked, curiously.
I hope we haven't kept him waiting.
I can almost promise you that he's not. I laughed. If anything, he probably hasn't even gone to bed yet. I walked through the den of the suite and knocked a couple times on Todd's door. Yo, Toddster! I called through the large white piece of colonial wood. It's time to head out. You awake? Bro! I heard a groggy groan from the other side. It's 2 in the morning. Being up this early should be illegal. Another thing to add to your platform? I noted playfully. I know for a fact you'd have Cupid's vote. Now come on, we need to get going. Give me like 2 seconds, bro. Todd groaned. I stepped away from the door and headed back to join the succubi.
Do we have a plan when we get to the Porta ad Inferos?
Sia asked.
Certainly we're not going to just wing it, right?
It all depends on what the situation is when we arrive, I explained. Ideally, we set a few traps or try to create a defensive perimeter around the gateway.
And if we don't get there in time?
Libby asked somberly. My expression stretched downward into a frown as I pondered her words. If they're already there, then we'll just have to take as many demons out as we can and hope that Jane, Oliver, and Raphael arrive with reinforcements in time. Great plan, bro. Todd chuckled from around the corner. Is it weird that I'm almost hoping it's the second one? When the imp came around the corner, the succubi and I all gasped in shock. The imp was no longer an imp at all. Instead, there stood Todd Masterson in all his human glory. It had been quite a while since I'd seen Todd's original form, but it was just as I remembered. My friend's long, blonde hair was greasy and unkempt, and he had a tiny soul patch on his chin. Thankfully, he must have remembered that humans couldn't hide their shame like an imp, and he was wearing one of the suite's bathrobes.
Bro,
Todd rubbed his eyes groggily.
I think I've got a case of the humans. I've had these hands since 1 in the morning.
Just the hands? I asked coyly. Not the whole...
What the fuck are you talking about, bro?
Todd's face contorted with confusion.
Your powers are working fully.
Sia giggled.
How charming. I see you started off with a fairly simple form. Are you the homeless man from down the street?
The redhead's words made me double over with laughter. I'd forgotten that she'd never seen Todd as anything other than a demon, and the idea of her confusing him with a homeless man was hysterical. Todd looked around at the four of us, completely lost.
These are my old human arms, he explained. I figured that if I couldn't control when my shit gets all changed up, at least I could make sure it's a familiar grip.
Familiar grip?
Libidine said as she tried to make sense of Todd's sentence. You don't want him to answer that, I warned, and then turned my attention back to Todd. Bro, are you sure it's just your hands that got changed?
What do you mean?
He said through a blank stare.
Todd,
Cupid hinted.
Don't you feel a bit taller this morning?
I noticed that my robe was fitting much tighter.
The blonde guy shrugged.
I simply figured I hit puberty or something.
You might want to go look in the mirror, I suggested.
Why?
A look of realization spread across Todd's face.
Oh no!
Todd ran off into the nearest bathroom to check himself out. Seconds later, there arose a blood-curdling scream. Well, I chuckled. He's definitely awake now. The scream went on for a solid minute before it finally ended.
Wait a minute,
Todd called out from the other side of the suite.
This might not be as bad as I thought.
Todd's footsteps rang out through the suite and grew closer and closer as he returned to the rest of the group. When he finally came back into view, I couldn't help but laugh. He wasn't Todd at all anymore. He was John Wayne.
Hey there, Pilgrim,
he said in his best Duke imitation.
We gotta go round up some demons and take 'em back to the ranch.
Bravo, Todd, I said as I applauded the imp.
No need to thank me, Pilgrim.
He couldn't keep a straight face as he gave me a tip of his hat, breaking down into impish giggles. John Wayne's body was suddenly engulfed with a brilliant flame, and then he started to shapeshift once more. His large nose and jowl slowly morphed into more pointed features, and his body began to shrink as horns replaced his cowboy hat. Soon the figure was back in the imp's familiar form, with the oversized bathrobe hanging off his shoulders like the train of a dress.
That's gonna be a game changer, guys,
Todd said with a shit-eating grin.
It certainly is.
Sia sounded impressed.
Think of how much easier it'll be for espionage or trickery missions now that we have a shapeshifter in our midst.
Fuck the missions,
Todd scoffed.
Think of how much easier it'll be to pick up chicks. Most of them are too intimidated by the sweet imp body and my massive schlong. Now I can woo them over while looking like a Calvin Klein model.
Maybe you can... I started, but the imp cut me off.
And with my massive schlong,
he continued. Well, yeah, but...
I wonder if I can change my dick size with these powers.
Todd closed his eyes and tried to focus. I think we need to go. Todd's eyes grew wide as he peeked inside his robe.
The answer is a resounding yes.
Ew, I groaned playfully. Really didn't need to know that.
We should probably get going,
Cupid grumbled.
I need to get some food in me, or it's gonna be a real long drive. For all of us.
Food?
Todd perked up.
Why didn't you say so? Let's go! Did you know there's a 24-hour donut shop not too far from here?
That's what... never mind. I sighed. You should probably still stay invisible for now, at least until we can find you some human clothes to wear, or you get a stronger handle on your powers.
Can I practice in the car?
Todd laughed.
There's a million different people I want to pretend to be.
Sure thing, bro. I shook my head with a smile as I tossed my duffel bag back up onto my shoulder. Now let's hit the road. As much as I wanted to stay in this incredible suite, we were already behind schedule. I took one last look around the colonial interior as the three succubi and the imp sauntered through the threshold, and then I closed the door. The five of us made our way down into the lobby, checked out of our room, and then headed out to Shadow. As I slid into the comfy leather interior, I couldn't help but feel exhausted. Despite the incredible night the succubi and I had spent together, we were still only running on a couple of hours of sleep. I turned the key in the ignition, and Shadow purred to life. I kicked the Jeep Wrangler into gear, and we headed off to our next destination, the all-important donut shop. Honestly, I wasn't even sure the strongest coffee in the world would keep me focused at this point. I was still worn out from the events of yesterday, and there was a lot on my mind at the moment. The 24-hour shop was only a few miles away, and it was no time at all before we were pulling up to the large screens of the drive-thru.
What can I get for you this fine morning?
A woman's voice announced through the loudspeaker. Can we get a dozen donuts? I ordered into the speaker. A mixed variety box if you have one. I felt Todd tugging on the sleeve of my shirt.
Bro, I want a whole box for myself. Chocolate glazed.
And 1 dozen of the chocolate glaze?
The more glazy, the better,
the imp implored.
I want that shit to look like it just went through a bukkake scene.
I had to take a moment to get the disgusting image out of my head. Extra glaze on those, if you could, I forced myself to say through my gag reflex. And then a couple coffees?
Cream or sugar?
The voice asked.
You know how I am.
Todd was now mockingly using a Jersey girl voice.
I just, can't even function until I've had my iced macchiato with 2 pumps of coconut milk, a hint of ginger spice, and a teensy tiny pinch of peppermint.
Just throw some packets in the bag? I got out as I managed to avoid laughing into the microphone. We can sort it out in the car. That'll be all. I pulled the vehicle around to the first window, paid for our breakfast, and then drove over to pick up our food.
Watch this, bro.
Todd snickered. A second employee was stationed at the pickup window, and his eyes grew wide, and his jaw fell open when we pulled up.
Is that Ozzy?
He asked in disbelief. What? I asked as I turned back to Todd, and then had to stifle a laugh. There, in my passenger seat, was the Prince of Darkness himself.
Hi there, mate.
Todd mumbled incoherently.
Out there for a little drive here in the nation's capital. Got the mad munchies if you get my drift.
The man was grinning ear to ear as he passed our coffees through the window.
I'm a huge Sabbath fan, you know,
he said giddily.
Always a pleasure, mate, fan.
Ozzy mumbled happily and then made devil horns with his hands.
Hail Satan! Hail Satan!
The guy reiterated and passed our 2 boxes of donuts through the window.
I slipped a few extra ones in there for you, Wizard of Oz. Thank you, mate.
I could tell that Todd was trying his hardest not to break.
You have a cursed day.
You too, Mr. Osborne. The man sounded like he was still in shock as we pulled away. The second we were out of sight, Todd returned to his impish form and began pounding the seat as he laughed hysterically.
Like I said, bro,
he cackled.
The possibilities are endless.
That was kinda cruel, I pointed out with a grin. That guy really thinks he just met his favorite artist.
I don't see the problem,
the imp said as he hopped to his feet and whipped around to address the succubi.
Did you, girls?
I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Libby shrug.
I don't see any problem,
the dark-haired woman agreed.
Todd made that man's day, and he got us some free food out of it as well.
Cupie's slender arm shot over the back of the front seat and snatched an entire box of donuts.
Speaking of which,
The blonde succubus sighed.
I feel like I could eat this entire box, even though I don't know what a donut is.
Have we seriously not had donuts in the entire time we've been together? I asked, as I honestly couldn't remember.
No, Jacob.
Libby giggled.
We've had lots of pancakes and waffles and sausages and eggs, but never any donuts.
You spoil 'em too much, Jakey,
Todd observed as he pulled out a chocolate donut from the box.
Donuts are cheap, unhealthy circles of fried dough. Just the way the Toddster likes 'em. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm about to indulge myself. You might want to look away. This is about to get freaky.
Todd stuffed the entire chocolate donut into his mouth and then gripped the seat tightly. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he made an over-the-top groaning sound as he chewed and then swallowed the donut.
Oh, I think I just had a fucking orgasm, bro, he joked. You gotta try one of these before I devour 'em all.
We were now out on the open highway, so I didn't have to worry about keeping my attention on the road. I reached down and grabbed one of the chocolate morsels, and a few pieces of the glaze crumbled off at my touch.
See?
Todd giggled.
Creamier than an albino vampire.
I raised the pastry up to my mouth and took a bite. The second it hit my taste buds, I could see what Todd was talking about. The donut must have been fresh out of the fryer because it was warm and greasy. That, mixed with a sweet combination of chocolate and the sugary glaze, made it taste like heaven on earth. Holy fuck, that's delicious! I exclaimed through a mouthful of crumbs.
No mouth orgasm, though?
The imp beside me chuckled. No, Todd, I laughed. I'm not that into food. From behind us, I heard Sia let out a sound of pleasure. I looked up into the mirror and saw that the redhead now had a mouthful of a Bavarian. She made a face of satisfaction as some of the creamy white filling dribbled down her chin.
Let me get that for you,
Libby cooed. The curvy succubus leaned over to Sia and sensually licked the cream off her face. She moved back into her seat, swallowed, and then moved her body back and forth happily.
Looks like the girls know what I'm talking about, huh?
Todd gave me a wink and a nudge.
Takes the term food porn to a whole new level.
This one is huge!
Libidine exclaimed. Again, I looked up in the mirror to see what was going on in the back. Libidine was holding a massive Long John donut in her hands, and my heart began to skip a beat as she raised it to her mouth.
Oh, please.
Cupid joked.
That thing isn't even close to the size of Jacob. Just because it's smaller than Jacob's dick doesn't mean it still isn't big.
Libby shot back.
I don't think you'll find many things in this world that can match that length and girth.
Sia cooed.
Jacob's is abnormally large.
Out of the corner of my eye, I could see that Todd had frozen in place. I looked over at the little imp, who slowly turned his head over to meet my gaze. His eyes were wide with disgust, and pieces of chocolate donut were tumbling out of his mouth. The imp looked down at the donut, then back at Sia, and then at me.
I'm never eating a fucking Long John again.
He shook his head as he spat a little bit of donut out onto a napkin and placed it back in the box.
In fact, I think I'm gonna leave the rest of this for you.
I heard Libidine make a gagging sound, and I slyly let my eyes slide back up to the mirror to watch. The succubus had the Long John halfway down her throat, and she was slowly trying to get the rest of it to fit, while her two sisters were cheering her on gleefully. Finally, Libby relaxed her jaw and slid the rest of the donut into her mouth with a singular gulp.
You know, not chewing their food has to be really hard on their stomach,
Todd mused as he opened the lid of his coffee. The imp fumbled around in the brown sack from the donut shop and produced a handful of sugars. One by one, he opened the little white packets and dumped them into his drink. Todd? I chuckled. How many sugars are you gonna put in that?
As many as it takes to turn this bitter beverage into a sweet treat,
He retorted and poured another packet.
everybody knows that's the only way to drink coffee.
I honestly prefer it black. I shrugged. It gives it a lot more power and it makes it less of a bitch on your intestines later.
Nah,
Todd scoffed.
like everything in life, you have to overpower it with sugar, and you're all good.
What is this concoction?
Sia asked, and I looked back to see her staring in awe at a jelly donut. The pastry itself was a deep golden brown, and it was coated in what looked like layer upon layer of granulated sugar. A bit of red jelly was oozing out of the opening in the back, and the redhead lapped it up with her tongue.
Strawberry.
She noted with a nod.
How fitting.
The madam placed her lips on the opening of the donut and inhaled deeply. There was a wet slurping sound as the jelly was sucked into her mouth, and her cheeks filled up like a chipmunk's. Sia attempted a few swallows, but seemed to back out at the last minute. Finally, she took a big gulp and then stuck out her tongue to show everyone that it was gone.
Oops.
She giggled and then bit into the remainder of the donut.
Force of habit.
Hey, Jakey,
Todd tapped at my shoulder.
I know that succubi are getting you all hot and bothered, but do you think you could maybe focus on the road? You've been driving on the wrong side for like 5 minutes.
I forced my eyes back to the road and realized that he was right. I panicked as I swerved back onto the correct side, but thankfully there hadn't been anyone else in sight. After all, what kind of a fool would be driving on the interstate at 3 in the morning? I took a swig of my coffee to try to calm myself. The liquid was bitter against my lips, but the jolt from the caffeine was just what I needed to get my focus back on the task at hand. We continued driving down the dark highway for about an hour, until finally I saw the light of the GPS indicate we were close to our destination. I turned Shadow off the highway and onto the back roads of rural Virginia. We continued through the winding roads of the countryside and soon found ourselves out in the boonies. There was even a time or two where our top-of-the-line GPS lost its signal, and I contemplated trying to wing it with an old-school map. I guess if you were trying to hide the gateway to hell, you'd want it as far away from civilization as humanly possible. Finally, Shadow's GPS announced that we had reached our destination. The only thing marking the driveway was a small black metal mailbox, and I nearly passed it in my exhausted, caffeine-riddled state. The gravel pathway appeared to snake back into the forest toward the location of the Porta Adin Ferros. I turned our black Jeep Wrangler onto the foreboding pathway, and we began the final leg of our journey. At this point, we had lost all signal to our radio, and the only noise that filled the vehicle's cabinet was the muffled sounds of Shadow's tires as they moved over the gravel. That and Todd's loud snoring. We traveled through the dense, foggy forest for a few minutes until we came upon a farmhouse that nestled at the foot of a large hill. The house was fairly large, with 2 stories and a wide base. Of course, its size was counteracted by the fact that it was old as hell. Pieces of the red vinyl siding were falling off in clumps, and the duct tape that reflected off our headlights told the story of many home window repairs. The roof of the structure appeared to be sagging in the center, and even the beamed porch at the front of the house looked like it was going to fall over if you even breathed on it wrong. There was a light visible through one of the second-floor windows, but I couldn't see any signs of people stirring inside. It was now 4:30 in the morning, so I imagined that it was simply a light that somebody forgot to turn off last night. I killed the lights in the engine of our vehicle, nudged Todd awake, and then the 5 of us tried to sneak out of the car as stealthily as we could.
Where do we even start?
Libby whispered.
There's nothing but forest and farmland as far as I can see.
I think you mean as far as the eye can see,
Todd corrected.
I mean as far as I can see.
Libby giggled.
But I appreciate your concern for my grammar.
The imp shrugged.
Just trying to make you sound smarter,
he explained.
Now where the fuck is the Portillo ad Inferno?
I didn't have the heart to correct the little guy. It might be tricky, I said as I pulled out my cell phone and began to search through the pictures. But we still have the photos from earlier at the party. That'll at least give us a starting point.
Oh, great,
the imp chuckled.
So we simply need to figure out which of the hundreds of open clearings in this forest is the right one, based off a grainy satellite picture. That'll totally be easy.
Todd. I clicked my tongue and tapped my temple. You're not using your noodle.
What's my dick got to do with this, bro?
The imp asked curiously.
It's not a hell portal finder, as magical as it may be.
Your head, Todd. I rolled my eyes.
Right, but what, you think my head is gonna point the way?
He motioned to his crotch.
It only does that when— No!
I cut him off with a laugh. It means you're not using your brain to think.
Oh,
Todd muttered.
Why didn't you just say so?
Never mind. I sighed, and then pointed to Cupid and Libby. We have 2 satellites of our own right here. They can fly up, do some recon of the area, and see if they find anything that matches the picture.
What about us 3?
Sia asked.
Are we going to wait here while the other girls go scouting?
I nodded to the redhead. We need to stay with the vehicle and make sure the owners don't get suspicious, I explained. Or more importantly, we need to make sure they don't spot the 2 demons that are swooping around their property on magic wings.
Ah, that'd be easy to explain,
Todd giggled.
Just tell them they're a rare species of birds or some shit.
A rare species of birds that looks exactly like a human woman and wears clothes? I raised my eyebrow at the imp.
Stranger shit exists in this world, bro,
Todd said as he scratched his chin with tiny claws.
I still don't think the platypus is a real animal.
Yet you believe in Bigfoot. I rolled my eyes and then turned to the succubi. You guys ready? Libby and Cupid nodded before they summoned their wings with a quick flash of purple fire.
You take the left sector, and I'll take the right, Libby.
Cupid nodded to her sister as her black angel wings raised into the air. Libidine wrapped her bat-like wings around her body and then crouched down to prepare for takeoff.
Godspeed, brave souls!
Todd saluted the succubi. Libidine propelled herself off the ground like a bullet, and seconds later, she was out of sight. Cupid's wings pushed downward and drove her up into the sky. She fluttered above us for a moment, suspended by her jet-black feathery appendages.
Show off?
Cupid grumbled, and then shot off into the morning air.
Not to, bring up a sore subject,
Todd mused as he watched the blonde fly away.
But where are your wings, Strawberry Shortcake? Did somebody forget to ring a bell for you?
That's angels, Todd, I corrected. Sia shook her head sadly and sighed.
Unfortunately, I never had that ability. I can produce wings, but they are tiny and useless, like that of a cherub.
Don't be sad. I comforted the woman with an arm around her shoulder. I think you'd look cute with Cupid wings.
Ugh, please don't compare me to the Angel of Love.
Sia shuddered.
He is deeply troubled. Have you ever seen a grown man wear a diaper before?
Nope, I laughed. And I never intend to.
Well, Someone's coming!
Sia hissed.
Who's out there?
I heard an old man's voice call out from the doorway of the house.
I've got a shotgun, and I'm not afraid to use it.
Don't shoot! I implored as I held up my hands. We're surveyors from the Bureau of Land Management.
You're supposed to give me a reason not to shoot you,
the old man growled.
What are you doing out here this early? We just wanted to get started before anybody woke up, bro,
Todd added. I turned my head and saw that the Toddster was now in his human form. Thank God. I was afraid I was going to have to try and bullshit a reason for why we had a little devil with us. The man must have been tickled by Todd's comments, and he began to laugh hysterically. He stepped out to where we could see him and lowered the shotgun he had cocked in his arms.
We're farmers, son, he chuckled. You should know our day starts at 4 a.m. sharp.
I lowered my hands, walked up to the old man, and extended my arm. "Jacob," I said as I shook his hand. "Jacob Ralston." I probably should have used an alias, but this guy seemed genuine. Besides, we were trespassing on his land in the wee hours of the morning. The least we could do was be transparent.
"You look like an honest man, Jacob,"
the old man in blue flannel observed.
"But you're late. Come on in. Betty made more breakfast for all you. We can discuss all this government nonsense over a plate of bacon and eggs." "I'm not gonna say no to that, broski," Todd giggled, and then headed toward the door of the house. Sia looked over at me, shrugged, and then followed Todd through the threshold. Late for what, if I may ask?" I questioned, but the man didn't seem to hear my words. "Come on, son."
The man turned around and motioned for me to follow.
"Food's getting cold, and your friend is already here."
"Friend?" My heart sank into my stomach. I began to walk toward the door as my mind raced with what he could possibly be talking about. I stopped for a moment and then looked back at the forest. I really hoped that we were buying Cupid and Libby enough time to find the Porta Adin Pharos, and I really hoped that our friend wasn't who I thought it was.
"Yeah?"
The old man sounded confused.
"You're part of our meeting, right? She was saying that the rest of you wouldn't be here until much later."
I nodded and followed. We had to play along for now, after all. As I walked through the door, I nearly froze in my tracks. Todd and Sia were already anxiously taking a seat at the table, next to an old woman I assumed was Betty. To their left sat two familiar faces, a short-haired woman with black hair, and a small, nearly tow-headed toddler. It was Sister Ira and her son. Chapter 17. For a moment, I thought that this whole setup had been some elaborate scheme by Ira to taunt us. The look on the succubus's face when we walked in, however, told a different tale. For the first time, Ira looked surprised.
"Your friends are here, Miss Franklin,"
the old man exclaimed as I made my way to the tiny circular dining table.
"Oh, these aren't the people I was expecting,"
the succubus said as her eyes narrowed.
"We were waiting for my husband and his secretary."
I slid down directly across from Ira and locked eyes with the demon. "Your husband and his secretary aren't coming," I hinted, not so subtly. "They're a little tied up at the moment."
"Is that so?"
Ira hissed. "Yeah, so he sent us instead." I continued the lie. Of course, being the peons we are, he didn't really fill us in on the nitty-gritty details before we left.
"That's a shame."
Ira grumbled.
"This is a fairly sensitive meeting about a very sensitive matter. It's not like my husband to leave his associates in the dark like this. Perhaps you can come back during our next meeting, once you have a firmer grasp on the issue."
"We're not that deep in the dark," I laughed and gestured to the old couple. "This is a meeting about Proposition 66 and how it's going to affect these nice citizens." "Shall I call your associate's mother?" the child's monotone voice interrupted.
"Creepy omen-looking fucker,"
Todd mumbled under his breath, and the little boy shot him a death glare.
"Not yet, sweetie,"
she said with a frown.
"Mommy can handle this on her own."
"So, what were you folks discussing before my associates and I so rudely interrupted?" I coyly prodded. "We're simply here to get a firmer grasp on the situation so that we can do our job better later."
"Who are these people, Elmer?"
Betty asked mildly. I looked over at Todd, who was pursing his lips. I was sure he wanted to make a Looney Tunes joke, but he at least seemed to be trying to hold back. "Where are my manners?" I slapped my forehead playfully. "I'm Jacob. I'm the project manager of this particular case. That charming young man over there is the head of development, Todd. And this redhead over here is Sia, our logistics manager."
"Sia,"
Betty mused.
"that's such a pretty name." Betty is equally as charming a name.
Sia said with a smile.
Pleasure to meet you, Sia.
Ira barely held back the growl in her voice, now visibly annoyed.
I really don't think Marvin would...
We're here on his orders, Ira.
Todd shrugged.
Excuse me?
Ira growled.
I mean, Megan.
Todd wrongfully corrected himself.
Do you even know my name?
Ira's pupils narrowed.
I would have figured top-level government employees would at least know their clients' names.
My apologies, Margaret.
Todd winked. Now he was doing it on purpose, and it was really getting under Ira's skin. Are you sure I should not call, Mama? The boy asked again as he brandished his cell phone.
Why, you have a cell phone?
Todd laughed.
You're like 4.
Mom, the smelly man is being mean. The toddler was also getting annoyed with Todd's antics.
Who you calling smelly?
Todd snarked back.
At least I'm potty trained.
When did that happen? Last week? The demon child shot back. I needed to turn the conversation back to business before things got too off the rails, so I turned back to Elmer and Betty. So, as I was saying, what is the purpose of this meeting? I asked. Marvin wants as detailed notes as possible, so spare nothing.
Mr. Pearson, I can surely tell my husband what has happened.
Ira chimed in.
I'm still not sure why your services are needed.
If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were trying to get him to leave.
Elmer chuckled.
I knew government was a cutthroat business, but sheesh.
Betty picked up a bowl of scrambled eggs and passed it between the succubus and me.
Here, eat some breakfast.
She smiled.
A little bit of bacon and eggs makes everyone happy.
Don't mind if I do. I grinned and plopped some eggs onto my plate. Thank you very much, Mrs.
Edison.
The old woman finished my sentence.
Thank you, Mrs. Edison.
Sia and Todd both repeated in unison. Meanwhile, Ira and her son looked shell-shocked. There was no way in hell this was going as they expected. So, back to Proposition 66? I started. Elmer scoffed.
What a crock of malarkey. No offense. None taken, bro.
Todd said through a mouthful of eggs.
Proposition 66?
The old man shook his head angrily.
More like Proposition 666. It's just another way the rich, out-of-touch politicians up in Washington are screwing over us common folk.
Now, Mr. Edison,
Ira responded,
we're going to compensate you quite generously for your land. At least double the calculated value and then some.
Elmer took a bite of sausage, sat back in his seat, and crossed his arms.
Sorry, sweetie, but you couldn't make me happy about this deal if you offered me 10 times the value.
The man grumbled.
These 400 acres have been in the Edison family since before Virginia was even Virginia. It ain't right that you're taking it for the public good. I'm a member of the public, and it ain't good for me.
That's why I'm here, Mr. Edison.
Ira was trying to keep her cool, but her eyes were growing crazier by the minute.
My husband and I wanted to come here personally and talk to you about all the good your land is going to bring to this great state.
Elmer let out a scoff.
You're not even from this state,
he accused the succubus.
You're from Arizona. Why do you carpet-bagging politicians think you can just come in here and tell us what's best for us?
Mr. Edison, my husband and I...
The dark-haired succubus began.
I don't see no husband.
Elmer cut her off.
It's just you and your cronies. At least they're all treating us like we're human beings, not just another voter to woo.
The man's sharp tongue left Ira speechless. Her visible simmering rage told me that she wanted nothing more than to rip this guy limb from limb. But she hadn't. Ira and her demon friend had been here alone with the couple for who knows how long before we got here. yet they were both still alive. I needed to get to the bottom of this. I'm having a hard time understanding the purpose of this meeting. I butted into the conversation. The proposition is already passed. The Edisons here don't seem too pleased about that, but there's nothing they can do. So I must ask again, Mrs. Franklin, is this meeting something trying to comfort them and smooth things over?
It's above your pay grade,
Ira sneered.
That's why my husband was supposed to be here, and not low-level employees like you.
My goodness!
Betty gasped.
That's not very kind of you to speak to this nice young gentleman like that.
It's okay, Betty. I reassured the old woman. I work in the government. I'm used to getting talked down to all the time. I hate it, but it's an honest day's pay. It really would help my friends and me here if we could know a little bit more about the nature of this meeting.
Of course, son,
Elmer nodded.
Mr. and Mrs. Franklin wanted to talk with us about the older features on our land.
Like the old barn, grain mill, and wishing well,
Mrs. Edison added. I looked over at Ira and grinned slyly. They didn't know where the Porta Adin Pharos was either.
We wanted to be sure that these historic sites were preserved as the new project got underway.
Ira huffed.
It was the least we could do to carry on these fine citizens' legacy.
You know, you could have simply let them keep their land,
Todd noted from across the table and then took a bite of bacon.
That'd be a great way for them to keep their legacy.
Whose side are you on?
The succubus hissed. Todd shrugged.
Your husband pulled a huge dick move by forcing that bill through,
he explained.
I may work for the government, but I don't gotta like it.
Elmer slapped the table and pointed to Todd.
I'm liking this kid more and more by the minute, Betty.
How would you know anything about a huge dick, imp? The Franklin kid mumbled under his breath.
I swear, kid, I'll drown you in a bathtub,
Todd whispered back.
I'm particularly interested in the wishing well.
Ira was not putting on a fake sweet voice any longer.
I've never actually seen one in real life. I've seen those ones that are in malls and parks, but never one with such history. Do you think you could take us there after breakfast?
I suppose we don't really have a choice, do we?
Elmer scoffed.
We either show it to you, or your workers accidentally destroy it to make room for a new highway or power plant or whatever you plan to do with my family's land.
Excellent,
Ira said as she shot me a victorious glare and then turned back to her child.
Hurry up, Ralphie. We don't want to impose on our hosts any more than we have to.
I'm finding it hard to eat, Mama. The boy shook his head, plugged his nose, and then pointed to Todd. This guy smells like a dead skunk.
You're not a basket of roses yourself, kid,
Todd chuckled.
I think somebody may have just shit themselves multiple times.
Gee, mister, do you kiss your mother with that mouth? The Franklin boy snarked.
Nope. I'll use it to kiss yours. She actually gave me a blow and go before I came here. You'd think it'd be hard to do with no teeth.
Todd leaned in close to the boy and whispered.
But it actually makes it feel 1,000,000 times more fun. She called me daddy a few times if it makes you feel better.
Don't talk about my mom like that, asshole, the little boy growled.
Now, Ralphie.
Ira tried to put the lid back on her faux child.
You know he's only trying to rile you up. He has the mental capacity of a child.
I don't give a shit. The toddler rolled up his sleeves and jumped on top of the table. I'm gonna make sure this shaggy-looking asshole has to eat his next Scooby snack through a straw.
Such a potty mouth!
Betty gasped.
Elmer, where's my soap?
Oh, shut the fuck up, you old broad, Ralphie snarled.
This wasn't the plan, Alvin,
Ira implored. The kid turned around and pointed a finger at the succubus.
We tried it your way, Ira,
It ain't working. Now we do it the fun way, by torturing these old bastards until they tell us the location of the Porta Adon Pharaohs. Hey, Jakey, Todd warned. I'm about to do something I've always wanted to do, but that society would never allow.
Albin turned back to Todd and summoned a ball of hellfire into his hand.
Oh, yeah?
He growled.
And what would that be, asshole? You finally gonna ask your first cousin for her hand in marriage? Nope. I'm gonna punch out a toddler.
Todd snickered and crouched down as the boy ran at him. Todd lit up his hand with a red flame, and he threw his body upward just as the boy came within striking distance.
Sure you can!
He exclaimed as his blow connected and the demon in disguise was sent flipping back through the air. The tow-headed toddler landed gracefully in the center of the table like a superhero. He stood up, and the old couple let out a shriek of horror. I could see why. The innocent face of the Franklin child was now replaced by the dark red complexion of a demon. His entire body began to glow red as he began to morph back into his true form. 2 tiny horns sprouted from his head, and cloven hooves ripped out of his dress shoes. The demon stood no more than 3 foot tall, with 2 stubby wings and a loincloth tied around his waist. It turned out Ralphie was an imp all along.
Well, this whole thing just went to shit.
Ira shrugged and summoned her own turquoise hellfire to her hands.
Die, bitch!
Albin screamed and sent a blast of hellfire right into Todd's chest. At the same time, Ira launched an acidic spray at Sia and me. I caught the blast with a violet shield, but that was just what the succubus wanted. The next thing I knew, Ira used that distraction as an opening to launch herself across the table. The hard cap of her knee crashed into my stomach and doubled me over in pain, but I was quick to recover. As I stood back up, the crazed succubus tried to feed me a face full of acid, but I threw out a green portal mere seconds before Ira's acidic spell turned my face into mush. The sickly turquoise blob reappeared directly above my target and crashed into the ceiling. Chunks of plaster rained down on Ira, who let out a grunt as the non-lethal debris smacked her in the head. The attack was intentionally non-lethal, but it had disoriented the succubus and left her open for a blast of Sia's red hellfire from my left, which sent Ira flying through the wall of the farmhouse. "Nice shot!" I called to the redhead.
Thank you. You have no idea how long I've waited to do that.
Sia grinned.
Okay, so that's how you want to play?
Todd yelled from across the room as he pulled himself to his feet.
Imp fight, motherfucker!
The stoner's human features began to contort as his body shrunk back to his normal size. Then, Todd summoned red hellfire into his hands as he returned fully to his imp form.
Who's ready for some hot imp-on-imp action?
He cackled as he charged at his doppelganger.
Somebody help!
I heard Betty scream in the chaos. Sia and I turned to see the old woman kneeling on the ground, holding her husband in her arms. Elmer was clutching his chest and looked like he was struggling to breathe. His belt and the top buttons of his shirt had been undone, and his skin looked flushed. He was having a heart attack. "Sia, you know what to do!" I nodded to the redhead. The succubus madam nodded and then ran over to try to heal the old man. I turned and made my way toward the hole in the wall where Ira had fallen. Small blasts of red hellfire were ricocheting across the room as the 2 imps tried to burn each other to a crisp, and I had to toss up the occasional purple shield as I walked to guard myself from their brawl. I slipped through the hole in the wall, but Ira was nowhere to be seen. The room on the other side of the wall was filled with furniture that looked like it was 30 years out of date, and a TV that was still an old tube model. The lime green wallpaper was peeling all over the place in dirty ribbons, and even the carpet looked like it could blend in with the dirt on the ground.
Yoo-hoo!
A voice called out from the adjoining room.
Mr. Hammer for a dick, I'm in here.
I called forth red hellfire into my hands and dug deep down into my emotional core. In the mirror on the wall, I could see two bright blue horns sprout from my head, and something else caught my attention. The irises of my eyes were now violet, like the succubi's. Maybe I really was becoming a demon lord. I carefully rounded the corner of the threshold with my magic at the ready. Sister Ira was sitting on the bed in nothing but tight leather lingerie. Her busty chest was just barely covered by the straps of her garment, which came up around her neck and were fastened to a collar. She was on her hands and knees, with her tongue hanging out of her mouth.
It's time to punish me,
she said with glee when she saw my hellfire.
Do your fucking worst, please.
Gladly, I growled and unleashed a blast of fire at the succubus. Ira didn't even try to dodge the attack. Instead, she stood up and thrust out her chest to absorb the full impact. She stood her ground as the fire engulfed her, and she made orgasmic sounds through the crackle of the flames. When the attack finally subsided, her body was burnt and bruised, but she was panting excitedly.
Is that your worst?
She begged.
Please, do more. Don't you have a dagger you can hold against my throat, or some sort of chain you can put me in?
Okay, this is starting to get weird, I began, but then was cut off by a noise from behind. I instinctively rolled out of the way as another spray of turquoise hellfire flew past where my skull would have been. Ira's eyes widened as the attack struck her just on the edge of the shoulder, and she screamed in pain as it sizzled on her flesh. The scream only lasted for a second before it turned into a groan of pleasure.
Somebody's been naughty, Jacob.
Ira's voice cooed from behind me. I turned around and saw the dom half of the succubus. She was wearing a leather corset around her torso and massive spiked heels on her feet. The dom had a belt full of BDSM goodies such as ball gags, a whip, a chain, and a few gadgets that I couldn't identify. In her hand, the succubus held a large morning star that was aglow with her acidic turquoise flames. You gotta be fucking kidding me! I rolled my eyes and summoned green fire into my hands. I picked up the entire bed with the sub still on it and then flung it at the dom. Ira's dominant half laughed happily as she readied her morning star. Once the bed was within striking distance, she used her enchanted weapon to skewer it and toss it off to the side. The sub backflipped into the air and landed beside her other half.
You missed me.
She pouted.
I wanted to get a taste of your hammer. Don't worry.
The dom rubbed the sub's hair lovingly.
I'll let you have a taste of Jacob's hammer before we kill him. That would be delicious.
The sub licked her lips and then extended her left arm.
But we need to get him in our grasp first.
A sharpened bone slipped out of the sub's right arm, and she grasped its base firmly in her hand. The succubus then ran a glowing red hand over the weapon, and the glowing red tail of a whip appeared. Not this shit again. I groaned and took a fighting stance. You claim to like pain, right? I'm gonna test out how much you can take.
Please do.
The sub moaned, and then the two halves of Ira charged. The dom was the first up, as she went for a home run swing with her morning star. I blocked it with a quick shield of purple, and then blasted her in the side with a small ball of red hellfire. The dom rolled away in pain, but I didn't even have a second to breathe before the sub's whip was headed toward my neck. I threw up my arm defensively, and the enchanted whip wrapped around it instead of my throat. I let out a scream of agony as the white-hot tail seared its pattern into my skin. Without even thinking, I grabbed the lower part of the tail with my hand and tugged it forward. The sub's eyes widened as I jerked her body forward off balance. As she stumbled forward, I unleashed another blast of red hellfire into her stomach at point-blank range. There were no sadistic moans of pleasure this time, as the sub's body blasted up through the ceiling of the living room, and her whip fell to the ground. I didn't have time to survey the damage to my arm, because Dom Ira was back in action, and another blast of acid was headed my way. I threw up a green portal and sent the attack down at the charging Dom's feet. The floor melted in front of the succubus, and she let out a wail as she tripped, fell, and rolled over to where I was standing. Spiky heels weren't exactly the greatest fashion choice, now were they? I remarked sarcastically.
You tell me.
The dom yelled as she lashed out with the point of her shoe. I hopped up into the air and summoned a violet platform under my feet. As I landed safely on the barrier, Ira's lethal heels passed harmlessly underneath. Without missing a beat, I summoned red hellfire into my right hand and blasted it at my opponent.
Ready to be punished?
The dom purred as her body was encased in a pink flame the moment before my blast struck home. As my flames engulfed her, the entire front of my body felt like it was being seared by a red-hot poker, and then I was blown off my feet. I tumbled through the living room helplessly until my momentum was finally halted by a wall. My entire body felt like it had just been hit by a freight train as I pulled myself up off the ground. My head was spinning, and there was still a burning sensation in my chest. I looked down to assess the damage, but saw little more than a burnt shirt. Fucking mirror spell. I removed the rest of my shirt and charged back at the dom.
Ooh.
She cooed and readied her morning star.
I've got you halfway undressed. Now I need to show you what a naughty little boy you've been.
I closed the gap on the evil succubus in seconds, and then slid down on my back as she swung her weapon like a baseball bat. As I passed by her legs, I stuck out my hand and knocked Ira's feet out from under her. The succubus let out a squeal of surprise as she collapsed to the ground. Before she had a chance to conjure up another mirror spell, I used my emerald fire to pick up the tube TV and launch it at the dark-haired woman. The massive projectile struck the dom in the back as she tried to stand up. Pieces of the screen shattered and flew across the floor, and her body fell to the ground once more. But the fight wasn't over. From above, down through the hole she had made in the ceiling, the sub swung down and struck me in the chest, feet first. My entire torso screamed with pain as I slammed onto the grimy carpet. The wind was knocked out of my lungs, and I struggled to catch my breath as I writhed on the ground in agony. As I laid there, I suddenly felt a light tug on my pants.
Oh my god.
Ira's sub-half gasped.
It's even bigger than I remember. I hope it tastes as yummy as it looks. Oh, it does.
Sia's voice echoed from the left. Then I heard the sound of crackling fire as there was a flash of red light, and then the sub's body flying over my head. Sia appeared over me and extended a helping hand. I grabbed the succubus's petite hand, and she pulled me to my feet. The two halves of Ira appeared to be down, at least for the moment. Now was the perfect chance to reorient myself after the chaos of the evil succubus's onslaught.
Thanks for the assist,
I said with a smile as I tugged up my pants.
What is it with these two and my penis?
It's quite impressive.
The redhead winked.
It was enough to convince Jane to join us, remember?
She gave me a quick once-over.
Are you hurt?
It's just a scratch.
I lied. Just a little whip burn, that's all. If you don't mind? Sia summoned golden hellfire into her hands, rubbed them together, and then placed them tenderly on my wound. My entire upper body lit up with the fire, and it felt like a million tiny ants were crawling around on my forearm. A warm, calming sensation spread through my body, and the burn marks slowly began to heal. The entire process only took a few seconds, and then I was as good as new. "Thanks, Sia," I said as I made a fist a couple times. "How are things out there?" The redhead shrugged.
Todd and Albin's infight is about as epic as you'd imagine, which is to say, not at all. They're just insulting each other as they throw balls of fire that are missing their mark by a yard.
"What about Elmer and Betty?" I asked.
I took care of Elmer.
Sia explained.
He's good as new, and I sent them out of the house to safety.
"Do you think they're going to call the police?" I questioned. "They've just seen a bunch of crazy-ass shit."
I asked them to wait for us.
Sia answered with a shake of her head.
I told them that the fate of our entire universe may depend on them.
No pressure, though, right? I chuckled.
You need to hit me harder.
The sub said weakly from across the room as she pulled herself to her feet.
Hellfire is child's play. Give me some real sadistic shit.
You asked for it. I shot back and then turned my attention to the Dom. She was starting to stir, but she still wasn't in any condition to fight. Using my telekinetic fire, I pulled a chain loose from her belt, raised it into the air, and then flung it at the sub. It wrapped around her neck with a metallic clank and gently lifted her into the air.
Oh my god.
She choked out.
I want more.
Son of a bitch. I shook my head. This is supposed to be torture, not fun and games.
Come on.
The sub giggled between gasps.
This isn't even going to leave a mark. Go harder.
Fuck that, I said as I released Ira from my grip. As she fell to the ground, I used the emerald flame to tie up her arms and legs behind her back.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
She cackled.
Grab me one of those ball gags over there.
I see Ira beat us here.
I heard Cupid's voice sigh. Sia and I turned around and saw the blonde succubus and Libidine standing in the doorway.
We heard the commotion and returned as quickly as we could.
Libby explained.
Even though it looks like you guys have things all tied up in here.
Well, other than Albin, I admitted. But I figured that was Todd's fight.
Yeah.
Cupid chuckled.
I'm not too worried about him. Now this girl, on the other hand,
Please, hit me with one of your freezing spells.
The sub begged.
I love the tingly sensation. It makes my nipples hard, and that makes it so much easier to put the clamps on.
that's gonna be a hard pass.
The blonde succubus sighed. So what do we do with them? I pointed to the two halves of Ira on the ground. We can't kill them, and if we just leave, they'll find a way to break out again.
We could deliver them to Azazel.
Libby suggested.
Signed, sealed, and delivered.
It took me a second to understand what the curvy woman meant, but when I did, a wide smile rose up on my face. Does that mean? I started.
Yes.
Libby grinned.
Saw it myself, just up to the northwest of the property.
And you think you could get us there again? I asked eagerly.
My navigational skills aren't the greatest,
The curvy succubus explained.
but it's a pretty straight shot. There's a charming little path that looked like it takes you most of the way there.
Then let's go fuck up Albin, and then we can send Ira and her other minions back down to hell where they belong. I grinned. I can't wait to fuck over Azazel again. The four of us dashed back into the dining area, where Todd and Albin were now tumbling across the floor, swinging at each other pathetically.
Get your hands off me, you grubby little midget!
Albin growled.
Who are you calling a midget, you nasty-ass gnome?
Todd shot back. All right, that's enough! I demanded, and shot out a blast of green fire. The fire surrounded the evil imp, and I lifted him into the air. He flailed his arms and legs as he tried to fight the spell, but it was no use. This little fucker was going to be the first one we sent back to hell. Without missing a beat, I encased Albin in violet fire. Then I closed my fist, and the barriers closed in on each other. The evil imp's eyes bulged as his entire body was smashed under the weight of my spell. There was a wet crunch as Albin's bones shot out of his skin, and then his eyes rolled back in his head, and his tongue flopped out of his mouth. I released his body, and the bloody heap fell to the ground.
I weakened him for you,
Todd said with an extended finger. Oh, of course, I lied to the imp. You did a great job, Todd. Todd jumped up in the air and pumped his fist.
Fuck yeah! The Toddster gets a gold star!
He shouted, and then began to rush around the room, doing cartwheels like a happy toddler. All right, I laughed. You just beat up a toddler, imp. Don't get too carried away, bro. We still need to—
Incoming!
Cupid screamed as she tackled me to the ground. I heard the sizzle of acid from above as a flash of turquoise shot past and melted the wall of the farmhouse.
Thank you, sisters.
Ira's voice called out before falling into a twisted giggle.
You did my work for me.
I turned to see Ira knocking away a barrage of blasts from Todd, Libby, and Sia with her morning star as she sauntered toward us. The succubus was still in her dom's leather corset, but the way she carried herself made me think she was back to her combined form. Her entire figure was glowing with the healing touch of golden hellfire as she strutted. I tossed up a barrier of purple fire to block another spray of acidic flame, but before I could launch a counterattack, Ira was already making her escape. The leather-clad succubus made a running jump, sprouted two massive bat-like wings out of her back, and then smashed through the doorway and out into the morning sky. Sia and Cupid both ran toward the new hole in the door, but the evil succubus was already far out of sight.
I thought she was down and out.
Cupid sighed and turned around.
She was radiant with the same magic I used to heal our allies.
Sia pondered.
I wasn't aware Ira had those powers.
It makes sense.
Todd shrugged.
If you're gonna ask people to set you on fire and cut you with a knife and choke you, you better have a way to heal yourself. Accidents happen all the time with that kind of shit, and nobody wants died by erotic asphyxiation on their tombstone.
She must have been playing possum.
Cupiditas growled.
That's just like Ira.
Although, you could get around the embarrassment by writing, "He died doing what he loved."
Todd continued, as if no one else was talking.
How could I have been so stupid?
Libby said sadly.
I just wanted to make you proud, Jacob.
I walked over to the raven-haired succubus and placed a hand delicately on her cheek. It's not your fault, Libby, I explained as I stared intensely into her violet eyes. Ira fooled us all. Nobody could have known she was going to have those sort of powers. Even Sia didn't know, and she knows everything.
That's very true.
Cupid pointed out. You know where the Porta ad Inferos is, but Elmer and Betty can give us more detailed directions, I continued. If we play this right, we could still get there before Ira and her goons have a chance to do any damage.
I hope you're right.
Libby pulled away and sighed.
I really don't want the end of creation to be my fault.
It won't be, I reassured as I stepped through the shattered door of the house. Let's go find the Edisons. The five of us went outside and walked to where Sia claimed the Edisons were hiding. We found the elderly couple out in the old barn behind their property, huddled together in fear.
Is our house gone?
Betty sobbed. Maybe, I confirmed. We might be able to fix it, but we're all going to be in deep trouble if you don't help us.
Why should we help you?
Elmer demanded and clutched his shotgun.
We invited you into our home, and you nearly killed my wife and me.
Sia saved you, remember? I pointed to the redhead.
We're the good guys, bro,
Todd added. My imp friend is right, I nodded. That woman pretending to be Mrs. Franklin is working for some really bad men, and if we don't stop them, the entire universe will be in danger.
What can we possibly do to help?
Elmer rubbed his head nervously.
We're only a couple of old geezers. We have no idea what the hell is going on.
You can start by telling us where the old wishing well is located, I explained. That's what she was here for, and now she's found it.
The wishing well?
The man in plaid was now confused beyond belief.
What could anybody possibly want with that?
There's a lot more significance to that thing than historical landmark, I told him cryptically. Let's just leave it at that.
It's out to the northwest of our property, Elmer confessed. If you head about 2 or 3 miles in that direction, you'll eventually come across it. It's in this beautiful little clearing where we used to have picnics all the time. Perfect view of the hills. But I guess that's over now.
Not if we can help it, I said, and extended my hand. Thank you, Elmer, for everything. We're going to make this right. Elmer hesitated for a second, and then reached out and shook my hand. The succubi, Todd, and I exited the barn and tried to formulate a plan. I called up Raphael, Jane, and Oliver to tell them about what had happened and to give them the location of the Porta ad Inferos. Each of them agreed to meet us there with reinforcements as soon as they possibly could, but they also feared it might take a while. Once our allies had been informed, the 4 of us headed off northwest toward the gate. The off-road drive through the woods was completely silent. We were all pissed, anxious, exhausted, and wanted this to be over. Even the normally foul-mouthed and snarky Todd uttered not a single word. More concerning, He didn't smoke a single joint the entire 5-minute trip. "This is as far as I think she can go, guys." I nodded to the forest ahead as I put our jeep in park. "There's not enough room for Shadow to maneuver through that brush. From here, we go on foot." The four of us got out of the vehicle and continued through the Virginia forest. The night air was eerily silent around us. No crickets, no frogs, not even any mosquitoes. There was definitely a magical quality to this place. We must be getting close. Finally, up through the brambles of the trees, I saw it. Upon first glance, there was nothing elegant or special about the Porta Adin Pharos. It was merely an old cobblestone well out in the middle of the forest. Just beyond the moss-covered gray well stood Sister Ira. "Last chance, Ira," I growled as we approached the succubus. "Give up now, and we might just let you out alive."
There are only two ways this can go, Ira.
Cupid warned.
You either denounce Azazel, or we will have to kill you. I know which one I prefer.
Is it sad that I don't know which one you're talking about?
Ira purred.
Either way, I prefer option number 3.
"What's option number 3?
Todd asked.
Is it like Plan D? That D fucked Marvin Franklin real good."
I'm glad you asked, imp.
Ira mused and then snapped her fingers. Suddenly, the air was filled with the sound of rustling leaves and tree branches. Then, the darkness lit up like a rock concert with the familiar embers of red hellfire. Out of the forest, behind Ira, stepped hundreds of hissing demons, prepared to attack.
Meet the 72 servants and their followers.
Ira giggled.
Or as I like to call them, option 3.
Chapter 18. Ha! Todd scoffed at the demons that were emerging from the woods.
72 servants? We've killed like 20 of you already. Shouldn't you take on a new name like the 52 Fuckwits?
Todd? I asked, as I prepared my red hellfire for an attack. I'm counting way more than 52.
Hundreds, actually.
Sia gasped.
Did you really forget about all the servants as minions?
Sister Ira cackled and then shot a playful look at Todd.
You know, Todd, you're much more fun than Albin ever was. He was simply grumpy all the time. Perhaps when I kill Jacob and my former sisters, I'll take you in as a pet.
Normally I'd jump at the chance to be a woman's pet,
Todd hissed and summoned hellfire into his hands.
But I get the feeling it'd be more of a Fido situation and less of a daddy one. Plus, I'm just not into demon chicks. Sorry.
Too bad.
Ira clicked her tongue.
Maybe I'll have to settle for making Jacob my plaything before Azazel kills him.
When will you assholes ever learn? I growled at the succubus at the front of the still and silent army. Azazel is never getting resurrected. Not on my watch.
In fact, we actually have to thank you, sister.
Cupid said with a grin as her hands lit up with blue and red flames.
You've brought all the remaining 72 servants to one place and spared us the inconvenience of hunting them all down on our own.
It's actually quite a shame,
Sia added.
I was looking forward to killing off the rest of them one by one.
Sister Ira doubled over in laughter.
You think I've done you a favor?
She mused.
I almost wish we weren't going to tear you limb from limb before you could see our master plan enacted. I'm really proud of it.
Enough with the talking!
A grizzled demon yelled and stepped up beside the dark-haired succubus.
We need to rip this mortal to pieces.
To say this fucker was tall would be an understatement. The bulky demon towered over Ira and the rest of the 72 servants like an NBA player over a dwarf. The demon had 2 large black wings that sprouted from his massive body and 2 stubby ebony horns that curved out at a downward angle. His entire lower body was covered with crimson scales like that of a dragon's, and upon his face sat a bushy white beard.
Ah, fuck.
Cupid groaned.
It's Furcus.
The Furcus? Todd asked in shock. Like Furcus, the legendary knight of hell?
Yep.
The blonde succubus continued.
Azazel's most trusted general in the flesh. Patience, my friend.
Ira noted.
We outnumber them nearly 300 to 4. At least let me play with my prey before I devour them.
No,
Furcus hissed.
every second we waste taunting this mortal is a precious second we could be using to destroy the armies of the divine. My patience is wearing thin. Succubus filth.
Ira's eyes narrowed, and her mouth twisted into a scowl at the demon's words, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Furcus turned away from the succubus, summoned a flaming pitchfork-like weapon with a flash of red flames, and then pointed it in our direction.
"Kill them for our masters!"
he bellowed to his followers.
"I don't want to see a single piece of flesh left on their bones."
The remaining 72 servants and their minions howled with glee and then began to charge across the small clearing. Ira and Furcus were right. We were hopelessly outnumbered. There were at least 200 or 300 demons and only 4 of us. Raphael and my followers were on their way to the battle, but who knows how far away they still were. We were probably doomed, but at least we could take some of these demonic assholes out with us. Seeing the charging demons and realizing that our chances of survival were minimal made it very easy to be in the right emotional state to cast a protective spell. My hands glowed violet as a massive purple wall of fire surrounded us. Spells of every color bounced off my barrier, including some that I'd never even seen before. Glowing reds, yellows, blues, turquoises, and even some silvers and maroons illuminated the dark morning sky as they tried to break my shield. Only the sheer strength of my emotions kept them at bay, for now. I turned to the 3 succubi. "We can't let them surround us," I ordered. "That means we're going to have to go on the offensive."
Jacob!
Sia gasped.
That's practically suicide.
"We don't have to kill them all,"
I explained.
"We just have to stay alive until backup arrives. I'm fairly confident we can do that."
And if we can't?
Cupid asked nervously. I wanted to tell the blonde succubus that everything was going to be okay. I wanted to tell her how we would easily take out this army of demons and save the world on our own. But I didn't want to lie.
"If we can't,"
I started with a somber frown, "then at least we lived our last few months on Earth with each other. That's the most a guy like me could ever ask for."
What was Todd saying?
Libidine asked.
All for one and one for all?
"Yup,"
Todd snickered.
"Totally made that up myself."
If we're going to die, then at least we'll go down swinging.
Sia nodded.
What is your plan, Jacob?
"In a few seconds here, I'm going to release my purple hellfire," I explained. "I can't hold this spell forever, but I still have enough power to create multiple smaller focused shields. I'll cover the 3 of us with those, while you 2 lay into these fuckers with everything you've got."
I love you, Jacob.
Cupid blurted out suddenly.
If we die today, I just want you to know that.
"I love you too." I nodded. "All of you. Now, are we ready?" Todd and the 3 succubi readied their attacks and spells, and hellfire danced around their fingers. 3, 2, 1, now! I screamed and dismissed my wall. The instant I did so, Cupid, Libby, and Sia tore into the crowd of demons with blasts of blue, black, and red hellfire. Meanwhile, Todd cackled as he acrobatically dodged the incoming attacks like a spider monkey. Several of the demons were sent flying backward, and a few of them were killed on the spot. Unfortunately, I couldn't really focus on the women's kill count or their creativity. I was too busy trying to make sure we weren't incinerated by the hundreds of spells being cast in our direction. I was tossing up so many small circles of violet that it looked like the Virginia landscape had come down with a case of the chicken pox. It was taking some very intense concentration to block each of the individual spells. Thankfully, most of these demons were little more than grunts, and everybody knows that your average foot soldier can't shoot for shit. Those guys were doing my job for me. As a couple more of the demon fuckers erupted into flames, Fergus's roaring laughter echoed through the clearing. The guttural sound boomed over the screams of agony and the sizzle of fire, almost as if it were taunting us. I took my eyes off our assailants for a fleeting moment and saw Ira and Fergus standing along the tree line with their hands crossed over their chest. The large demon had his head thrown back in glee, and the succubus wore a broad smile on her face. We really were fucked.
Jacob!
Sia commanded as she threw a group of demons away with a flick of her black flame.
Cupid, Libby, and I can't keep at this forever. We need your divine powers if we want to stand any chance against these hordes.
I tossed up a small purple barrier just before a yellow spear collided with the redhead's skull. If you haven't noticed, I'm the only thing keeping you guys from being turned into human pincushions, I shot back.
I think he needs a bit of motivation, Sia.
Cupid called out as she rolled out of the way of a blast of red hellfire.
Let's get out of harm's way, shall we?
The blonde's back was engulfed with a purple flame as her dark angel wings sprouted. Cupid propelled herself off the ground, and then she swooped over, grabbed Sia, and lifted the two of them into the sky. Libidine was right behind her, on her bat-like demon wings. As the three succubi ascended, vibrant spells of every color blasted past them. Cupiditas expertly maneuvered through the air, dodging attacks as her sister rained down blasts of red and black fire onto the crowd, while Libby dispelled the attacks by blasting them with her own telekinetic flames. Although most of our opponents focused on the airborne succubi, they hadn't forgotten about me. I knocked a few projectiles away with a cast of purple, and then began to unload randomly onto the army of demons. Adrenaline pounded through my body as I continued to deflect attacks and blast the flesh off the fuckers with my fireballs. My temples were now throbbing with pain, and it felt like my brain was going to explode out of my skull. From across the way, Fergus's face grew sullen. I wasn't sure how, but apparently I was wiping the smile off that smug asshole's face.
Bro! You must be a grower, not a shower!
Todd's voice sprang up beside me as he reappeared.